Hello, hello, my lovelies. We're just going to start off this episode with a hell to the fuck yeah. Because I am already so revved up to bring you guys this episode. I've been working the outline for the last hour or so, and just even in typing it, in thinking about the things that I'm going to talk to you guys about in this episode, I have been like, oh, I am on fire. I am feeling so fierce and ready to just speak what I hope will be some serious truth bombs for y'all in this episode. This is something, as you guys can tell from the title, I think so many of you, this is going to be an episode that's going to be made directly for you. I have met over and over and over women that I get on 90-minute intensives with, or that I coach one-on-one, who bring up this exact point. The big conundrum that y'all seem to be in of, well, wait, now he's trying. Shouldn't I want to stay? But oh no, I still don't want to. What's wrong with me? And tying yourselves into knots to try to figure this out. So I have got so much to go into with y'all. There's going to be a lot of beautiful aspects. I'm really going to dive in. I'm going to talk about, a scale, the way I kind of think of these different relationships that I've seen come through when I'm talking to women. I'm going to discuss really where I think the heart and soul of this lies, which you guys can probably already guess. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about, thankfully this month, we were doing boundaries work in the community. And through that work, we talked about the importance of understanding your own values. And that's really what I've realized. I put the two together and I was like, oh, this is the key. This is how you get out of this tangly, twisty, turny merry-go-round of hell that you are on. Those of you that are in this, well, he's trying, shouldn't I want to stay mess? I've got the answer for y'all. So let's dive in. Okay, so I thankfully had just like so many resources to kind of pull from. I went back and I read multiple, when I do 90-minute sessions, I take like in-depth notes, and I have quite a few clients that I have notes on talking about this exact thing. So I went back and I read a lot of those to kind of get a feel again for what it is exactly that I'm talking about. And so I wanted to kind of frame it at the beginning, because I think it's really powerful, those of you listening, when you're in this, to hear, oh my God, other women are going through this as well. And to hear kind of that same phrasing, those same words, to kind of help you know, like, is this me? Am I one of the people that she's going to be talking about? So some of the phrases that I heard that I was pulling from my notes with these women were things like, well, now he's doing all the things, but I'm just not feeling it. Like, it feels like it's too late, or I feel like I've already checked out. This is, these are women saying, we've now reached a point where my husband has done literally everything he could possibly do. He's done the therapy. He's owned his part. He said, I love you so much. He's apologized for all the shit he's put me through. And yet I still feel like, why can't I get on board? Why can't I get with the program? In this instance, we've got husbands who are like coming to their wives saying, what more can I do? What else do you want from me? Just tell me exactly what you need me to do and I'll do it. Feelings of like knowing, okay, I could probably stay, you as the wife, right? I could probably stay and make it work if I wanted to, but I can't seem to make myself want to. I just don't want to. A lot of mentally, okay? You're going to notice a lot of mentally this feeling of like, okay, I could stay and suck it up and carry on and keep doing the things. But when I sit there and check in with how it feels in my body, it's a very different feeling of staying versus going. And for many of you, the staying feels like, okay, yeah, I could survive this, but it's not really what I want. And the going will often, I've heard it described as like this huge relief, like this somatic in the body. And I'll see it on calls when I have these women get on with me and I'm like, yeah, and we'll talk about later, like why it makes sense that they still want to go. But when I actually validate and I'm like, yeah, it makes sense you still want to go, it's okay, you can go, the immediate relief in their body, the just like, oh, okay. I've heard it described as like my inner knowing is telling me that I should go, but my logical brain is just like, no way. It's for many of these women, it's so pretty on the external. We have the house, we have the dog, we have the kids. Nobody else knows how bad it is. We're the group, the couple that everybody looks at and says, wow, I wish we could have your marriage. If I ask him to get this for me, or to, run around in circles and jump through hoops, he will do it, right? No, whatever I ask him to do, he's willing to do it. I just got to tell him. Okay. So this is what I kind of wanted to start off with, to just throw you right in to the pool. And I'm hoping that some of you are like, oh yeah, this is me. This is me. Now, okay. So with that starting, so you kind of understand who I'm speaking to, I also want to expand that a little bit, because there are going to be others of you that are going to be on like different areas of this scale. Okay. And when I'm talking about a scale, I'm just thinking of like a visual, like from positive to negative kind of scale where we have a huge spectrum. Okay. And I really want, while you're listening to this, what I want to avoid the most is I'm going to talk about a lot of the episode's going to be on a pretty extreme example that I keep seeing cropping up, because I really feel it's important to speak to these specific women, because they are the ones that are the most tied in knots around this right now. But I still see it happening to those of you on like that are further in on the spectrum, that are not in the like really, really extreme part of this scale. So I want to start there. And I kind of actually want to talk about those of you that are like on the furthest kind of maybe opposite ends from each other. And then we're going to come back into this deeper group that's kind of more in the middle towards the like severely negative end. Okay. So there are some of you that are going to have, when we're talking about this scale, husbands that actually are good guys genuinely trying. And I really want to define this for you, because as I'm going to explain later on, those of you that are in the toxic relationships tend to tell me a lot that your husbands are good guys that are really trying. But when I actually break it down with you, I am horrified at what is actually happening and how your brain is just covering it up for you. So that is not what I'm talking about. When I am talking about good guys that are genuinely trying, I actually have in mind, I've got a couple women that I know, one in my community, one that's been a one-on-one coaching client of mine, where I would say these are probably more on this end of the scale of husbands who are genuinely good guys that are trying, and it's still for their wives not enough. But let me explain kind of what I see from these men. So in the first instance, this is a relationship that when the two of them got married, like started out as really good friends. They've had a really great, I would say, like built a great life together. He's productive. He's helpful. He's a great dad. And by great dad, I mean like, he helps around the house. He actually pulls his weight. He actually, in their specific instance, she is really into her career. And so he's done a lot of the primary caregiving for their son. They are flexible in the way their marriage has been. They've been able to she's lived away at times to work and he's been at home with their son. Like there's a lot of just, this is a good human being, like baseline level stuff. I would offer too, another example would probably be, although I think I'd be a little bit further in towards like the unhealthy scale, would have been like my relationship previously with my ex-husband, like deep down a good guy, like was not, verbally tearing me down. We definitely had some narcissistic behaviors there as I think back on it. And that's why I'm like, it's such a scale. You just have to know kind of where you are on the spectrum. And we had a lot of codependency too, because I had been raised to be that way. So I don't want to go too much into that, but coming back to baseline level, he was a good guy. And what I mean by that is even post divorce, I've seen how like my ex-husband shows up for our kids. He, drops them off on time, picks them up on time. We're able to work together to facilitate, if he's going to be out of town, I've got the kids. If I want to be able to go do something one night and I need a babysitter, he's going to take them. Okay. This is, a human who moves through the world with some level of empathy and understanding others. Same thing with my client. I would say her husband's in the same boat. And then I have another individual I'm thinking of, another member in my community with where her husband, same thing, like has a job, working, helps around the house, takes care of the kids. He's a good dad. They just don't, she considers him a friend, would like to stay friends with him if they were to get divorced. But there are things missing for them in the chemistry and the romantic connection. And that's the same with the other client that I was talking about. So this is very different than what I'm going to talk about a little bit later. These are men who also, on this spectrum, these are men who, when affairs have come out or when a divorce has been mentioned, they go deeper into themselves. They are like, shit, okay, I am part of the problem. I need to get some help. This is that episode I gave you guys a long time ago where I said, like, the two ways you can know if this is really somebody who's going to change is, one, can they admit they're part of the problem? Can they see their own issues? And two, are they facilitating and actively going and getting their own help? Now, in both of these clients, one of them, their husband is, and in the other, he's not. So, it's just, once again, that spectrum. But I would say they're both falling more on the positive end of the spectrum, okay? And I would also offer, these are husbands, some of the things you want to be looking for here if you're still like, where do I maybe fall? These are guys who are trying to process their own shit and not projecting it onto you. And when you ask for space, they're giving it. And I want to especially offer here, they are backing off of over analyzing you. Men who go to get their own therapy and then come back and feel like now they need to analyze you and tell you how you must be the problem because, the sexual abuse you experienced in childhood or your fucked up parents, or when they become an expert on you, that is not what I'm talking about, okay? These are men who are trying to stay in their lane and who, this is a big key, when things are brought up, like when you're expressing, hey, I'm not okay with that, or that's not working for me, they are able to hold themselves enough to hold that in an adult way and like hear the feedback and respond without, being totally thrown into like, oh my God, I can never do anything right. Or I just, I'm so afraid you're going to leave me. And then you having to manage and caretake their feelings. Notice if you come to them with a problem and you walk away from that with you having had to manage and caretake their feelings, that is not a good sign. Okay, that's going to be more like the relationship I'm going to talk about later. Okay, so kind of painting a picture for you of like over on this more positive end of this spectrum of what we're looking for when we're seeing like why do I not want things to work? Okay, when we're thinking about people who are trying and when it's not working, we're now going to go down into like the more negative end of the spectrum so we get a better picture of why you feeling that way might actually make sense. So down on the very, very opposite end, okay, is experiences like the women I talked to. So I actually had like 2 women that I ended up coaching in the last month who have told me very similar versions of these scenarios where in one of them, one of the women, she had just like finished getting home, brought in, like had a whole bunch of groceries, had spent a day like taking care of the kids, making dinner. And she gets home and her husband's on the couch watching TV. And she happens to ask him to bring in one small thing from the car. Okay. So that's the first instance. And then in the second story that I heard, a woman who had just made dinner, had cooked, and had finished doing all the dishes, like cleaned the kitchen, and her husband ends up cutting something on a cutting board, and instead of like spraying it off and cleaning it off, he just sets it in the sink. Okay. So in these 2 instances, right, here's what ends up happening. So the first woman goes in, asks her husband to come get something out of the car. Very small, very like, this feels like a very neutral ask here. And he fucking loses his shit. Starts screaming at her. Why can't you leave me alone? Why can't I ever get a break? All you ever do is ask me to do stuff. I mean, total like 10-year-old little boy tantrum that's now in a big boy body and is fucking scary and just like over the top upset about something that, if we go back to that spectrum, guys in a more healthy spot of that spectrum, this is expected. Like, you help. If your wife gets home with a bunch of shit that she's just picked up for groceries, you go out and you help. You're not just going to be sitting your ass on the couch. Can you feel how fiery I am, y'all? Woo! Oof. Okay. Now, also in the other instance, this woman happened to see the cutting board and just mentions to her husband, hey, you know, I happen to just clean the dishes. Next time when you finish with the cutting board, can you just spray it off and put it back? Once again, absolute over the top explosion. Like, in this instance, he was holding some things, like throws them to the ground, high drama. Oh my God, why can't you ever be happy with anything? It's never enough for you. And then she's like, okay, don't worry about it. And he instead stomps over, like sprays off the thing. Fine, I'll do it. Like, whoa, y'all. Like, are you fucking kidding me? This level of the spectrum, these are men who I'm like, what the hell? Do you think we're living in the 1950s? What's going on here? Okay. These are like your very gender stereotyped, heteronormative, like raised, cannot expand their view on what we're doing now here in 2024. Welcome to the new world. Obviously, they were not updated. Women aren't doing that shit anymore, are putting up with it. So that's that really, really negative end of the spectrum. Okay. And I'm sure, you know, even further than that, you would have women that I know there are some of you probably listening to this that are like, ooh, mine's even worse. And I don't even want to like use worse, better, or worse, because I think the most important thing with giving you this spectrum, and as I'm going to say later, is that you have to know what is worst for you. Okay. So to give that some context, there's a lot of dudes that would be up in like the more positive end of that spectrum that would still be not a fit for me because I have really high standards for myself. I'm like, yeah, boo, if you can't, you know, I wouldn't even go near, right? If you're going to freak the fuck out on me for bringing something in from the car, that's a no. And that's just something I've had to learn too. I want to like caveat that by saying I definitely had a partner, you guys know this, a couple years ago that I dated for a long time who did have this kind of like drama tantrum behavior. And at the time, I exhibited a lot of what I'm going to talk about in this episode, which is the hoping he's going to change. I'm also going to recommend, in fact, I'll just do it right now. There's a really awesome podcast that I just found called Why She Stayed. We're going to link it in the show notes that will go in depth into the psychology behind emotional, verbal, physical abuse and why you end up staying. So I'm not going to go way down deep into that because there's already an incredible resource that I'm pointing you guys towards, but highly recommend if you are experiencing or really resonating with a lot of this and the feelings of just feeling so guilty and sad for your partners and caring more about them than you do for yourself, that's an incredible resource. Okay, so now I've kind of shown you guys this spectrum, okay? We've got, you know, men that are like maybe really trying, and we've got men down at the bottom that are like, in my opinion, what are we even fucking doing here? You can't even come get something out of the car. Now I'm going to talk about this very interesting group that I have had multiple women, and I'm not even like, it has been so surreal to have women talk about this with me before because I had a client that I was coaching one-on-one who talked about very specific things. I'm going to actually put a few of them here because then I had like a 90-minute client who literally talked about the same things. I was like, this is the scariest deja vu I've ever heard, that they basically are experiencing the same kind of changes in their spouses. And that's when I was like, I'm pretty sure this has got to be some kind of psychological. I've not found a name for it yet. When I do one day, I will tell you guys on the podcast, but this is definitely some kind of mental, I don't want to say illness, but we've got something going on here that definitely involves psychology. So now that I've made you guys totally like, what the fuck is she going to talk about? Let's dive in. So the relationship I am wanting to expose and to really bring to light the most on this episode is one where I have women who get on calls with me and they will talk about the level of neglect and abuse they have experienced in their relationship prior to the moment where maybe they had an affair and it got found out, or they end up saying they want a divorce. And then their husbands do what they call a complete 180. Okay. So this is where we are looking at, I don't think it even matters how many years, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years of severe narcissistic abuse. This is, ignoring, judging, criticizing, neglecting. Like, we are not experiencing affection. We are, by all accounts, like pretty much just surviving kind of as roommates. There'll be instances where there's typically a lot of codependency on the part of the woman, really caretaking, thinking, if I can just do better, if I can just do more, if I can just be this, changing yourself a lot to be everything that you think he wants, and it never being enough. And then this really, really fucking tricky piece, which is that once you finally lose your shit and you're like, I'm done, I want a divorce, or like I said, you've had an affair and it's been found out, all of a sudden he is showing up. And these were some of the things that these women told me end up happening. So they described like husbands who all of a sudden are just doing all the right things. Like, okay, you've been asking for years for me to go to therapy. I'm going to therapy. Now I'm going to be working on my childhood trauma. A big key phrase I hear often is he is like a totally different person now, right? Things like where previously, you asked to go to therapy and he hated it and told you not to. Now all of a sudden, he's looking up a therapist for you, finding one for you and one for him. Often these men will be begging to do couples therapy and they will say things like, just give me a chance to prove it to you. They will beg and plead, just give me a chance. I've noticed one of the biggest like flags for this as well is they shift their focus from work to the family and it becomes their number one priority. Where previously they were very, work always came first, coming home late, never getting up and helping with the kids in the morning, never helping the kids brush their teeth, never getting the kids ready for school. All of that. Okay. Oh my God. Like, as I'm saying this, I'm having like 2-3 other women I've talked to come to mind. Like, I'm so glad I'm doing this episode because there are a lot of you out there in the middle of this. So there's another aspect of this that I also want to talk about. I've noticed in these marriages, so not only are these husbands who previously were very neglectful, like very, very focused on their work, okay? Sometimes when it flips around and they start going to couples therapy or they start doing their own therapy, instead of that therapy creating self-reflection for them, it'll do this tricky little thing where all of a sudden they're like, oh, you know what? I'm not getting my needs met. Like, now I understand what I need, especially when it turns out that what they need is a lot of physical affection or a lot of attention. And especially if this is an instance where you've had an affair, they start to use that aggressively. Like, well, I just can't trust you anymore. And I just feel so hurt and so scared. And I don't know if you're going to cheat on me again. And when you don't want to have sex with me, it just hurts my feelings. We feeling this? We hearing this? Right? And so they start to, therapy is not actually making them more empathic as much as it's leading them to like, well, I have needs and I need to make sure that my needs are getting met. So I will notice with some of these relationships, there will start to be, and especially, I just want to like drive home. If you've had an affair and they found out about it, they will use that affair to start manipulating you by saying, you're not touching me enough. One of the things that has come up multiple times that freaks the fuck out of me is men all of a sudden, because they've read literature on how like 6-second kisses are supposed to, or like holding, doing like a 6-second hug or something is supposed to help bond and calm the nervous system. They will start insisting on these. They will insist on those kisses. They will insist on the hugs and the affection. They will go from like not being affectionate or kind or interested in you to all of a sudden leaving you notes, texting you incessantly throughout the day. I love you. You're so sexy. You turn me on. And what you're going to notice is this, instead of feeling good, which is so fucking confusing because it's what you've been like begging for your whole marriage. Please connect with me. Please let me have attention. Please see me. It doesn't feel good. It feels overwhelming because all of a sudden, this person who actually has been on the opposite end of the spectrum, really abusive and emotionally neglectful, is now plying you with gifts, plying you with attention, touching you all of the time, all of a sudden wanting to have sex with you all the time, potentially. Another aspect that I heard, that I noticed like repeated, another theme that I've seen is that there'll be this definite, like I said earlier, a merry-go-round kind of feel where you will go through these phases where it's like, okay, we're having a really great weekend. Like, and I've noticed you will get back into this. I need to, like, in them doing, quote, all the things, these women start feeling like they have to do all the things back. So you start really trying. So you're like, okay, I'm gonna try to kiss him. We're gonna start having sex again. Like I'm gonna check all the boxes. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, when things are going really good, he will all of a sudden just be like, you weren't affectionate enough. Right? Or this is one of my favorites. This was something that came up multiple times. They will talk about you as if there was an old you that would have done something differently. Like the old you would have been more affectionate with me. The old you would have done this, which when we actually check in on it in my coaching calls, I'm like, there is no old you that used to do these things. They have created a whole new reality that they are brainwashing you with. I've noticed strong messaging around them, like, especially if you had an affair, now taking the stand of like, they're the ones that have been hurt. They're the ones that have been abused. And so now they have a standard now, and they are not going to settle for less. And so there's a lot of like, are you reaching these benchmarks? Are you showing up enough? Why aren't you reconnecting into the relationship? I don't feel like you're working hard enough. They act like they're doing all of the work on their end and that you are not giving back. Some of the other things, they will, start coming home from work early. In fact, I do remember this happening for me. I in my marriage, my ex-husband had just been so busy at work, and all of a sudden it switched, and he was like coming home often, working from home. And contrary to that helping things, it really made things worse, because the best way I can say it is like, you cannot just fucking go change the external and expect that to repair all of the emotional internal damage that has happened over years and years of neglect and narcissistic abuse. That is not how this works. So I'll definitely see a lot of the roles will feel like they have flipped. Now your spouse will be over communicating, like over telling you how they feel, maybe telling you how I really wanted you to give me a hug and you didn't give me one and now I'm sad. I noticed women saying a lot like that in some ways it's super tricky because your life feels easier, right? Because you're not experiencing the really, really like blatantly obvious abuse, and you don't feel like you have to monitor everything. And it may like look on the surface like things are more normal, but, and this is something consistently that they tell me, but on a physical level, it still feels icky. That is such a huge key, is how is it actually feeling though in your body? I've heard other phrases of like literally overnight he changed, men who are like, I will do everything, and are. I've had clients who have like, I have a client who will say she wants like an item, mention it casually. It's on her desk the next day, bought, paid for, there. Giving you whatever you want, saying I love you a ton. There's so much of talking about your body, talking about how much they love you, how they could never be without you. I've once even heard a client describe it as like, because it's such a sharp 180, it feels like you're almost with someone who's like a robot. Like, are they really doing this because they really want to, or what's really going on here? So let's dive in to what I think is really going on here and why, as I said earlier, I do think this is in these exact instances, I think there is more at play here, perhaps in the like mental health area than I've been able to fully pin down. But I swear, guys, there is something going on here. And typically I think it has to be related to something involving narcissistic personality disorder, because in these relationships, there's so much abuse and neglect at the beginning that this 180, and the 180 feels so yucky because it doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like emotionally connected. It's just all of the things that I told you I was wanting. Now all of a sudden you're doing them, but I can't actually feel you in them. Now, one of the things I noticed too, and that I hear so much when these women bring these relationships to me, is they are always coupled with this parallel story of, I feel so bad and so guilty that I can't get on board with this. There are phrases like, I mean, this is now the relationship I've always wanted. Your brain says these things like, I mean, I have such a beautiful home. I have a husband who's telling me he loves me, who's offering to do anything for me. Like, why wouldn't I want this? They will often talk and they will tell me like, he's made all of these great changes. Maybe if I could just love him, we could make it work. There is so much of your brain using language to hide from the realities of what's actually happening. So I will hear a lot of like, it's so great. It's so much better. He's doing everything that I've ever wanted. And really I don't know why this word came through for me, but like the word was like self-castrating. Like your brain is like cutting off your attachment to your intuition by being like, this is what I should do, or thoughts like people change, people grow. Like the right thing is to go back and keep your family together. Like, why would you leave if he's trying? Shouldn't I be able to find my way back to him? Like, even though there was abuse, now he's changing. So this is why I'm like, yeah, there's definitely the like codependent narcissistic dynamic happening in this. And this 180 is so confusing because your brain has been programmed to minimize the negative. So in him doing, like taking away a lot of the things that you had been previously anchoring yourself with, of like, look, he's kind of showing up as a shitty dad. He doesn't even brush the children's teeth. He never home, can't come home from work and help with us. His work's everything to him. Now he changes those things and your brain goes, it's like I can hear the gears getting stuck around, wait a second, is this, and shouldn't this be enough? Shouldn't I be grateful now? Okay. And here's how I want to dive in to why that is. Why, instead of going, okay, you know what? I understand you're changing. And also it's too little, too late. Like I can still feel in my body it's not a fit for me, and just feeling confident in that. What do we do instead? We settle. Women have been programmed to settle. Okay. In our culture, in our world, by the patriarchy, we have not been taught to have our own personal priorities and values. I can tell you right now, I was never told as a young woman, I was never asked, like, what are you passionate about? What do you want to give to the world? What do you want to bring to the table? Who do you want to be? Everything was always framed through my role in other people's lives. So growing up, and actually this month, like this is what we talked about on our workshop in the community. I shared that growing up, I was taught that my priorities should be, and this is in order, my priorities should be God and the church first, then my marriage. So that's, my marriage, that includes my husband. Then it needed to be my kids, Then it needed to be like my parents, my siblings, right? I needed to be a daughter, a sister. And at the very end of all of those things, maybe if I had enough space left over, me, maybe what I enjoy. But that was so dead last. Like I grew up not even considering my wants, not even living in a world where I was allowed to want or encouraged to want. And even going so far as to have internalized that wants were selfish. Women who go and do what they want they're women who they're painted as women who don't care, women who are, the word I keep coming back to is just selfish, right? It's so selfish to live a life as a woman that is based off of what you want. And that's why, a client said this week, actually in one of our community calls, she mentioned that like 99% of staying in this marriage is from not wanting to hurt his feelings, right? And that is like the core of what I'm trying to express in what is happening in these instances where y'all are staying, not because you genuinely want to stay, but because you're like, well, he's trying now. And he's going to be so upset and sad if I leave now that he's trying. So shouldn't I stay? And that's why I'm saying, holy fuck, this is programming at its finest. That as a woman, we don't even consider, our first consideration isn't, wait, what are my priorities? What are my values for my life? And coming from that space, no, what we go to first is, well, as long as he's trying, I should give him another chance, right? As long as he's trying, everything that's happened shouldn't matter anymore. And this also goes back, I just have to point this out. I think this comes from a lot of like religious conditioning around forgiveness and our priority and our celebrating and upholding that like forgiveness is the most important thing. Y'all know I'm over that shit. Let me define it this way. I learned very powerfully through my own journey, and I'm still in the process of unearthing my trauma in my family of origin, really being honest with myself about the impacts of my parents and the relationship I had with them, and really reclaiming that forgiveness is my choice and mine alone. And I will never be shamed into forgiving someone before I'm ready to ever again. Ever again. One of the healthiest things I did was being able to be like, no, I'm not forgiving my dad. I am happy and ready to sit and be in the space of allowing myself to feel the safety of knowing I don't have to forgive that person yet. Because that was what was denied me as a child, right? It was always, you got to forgive that person. You got to make that person feel good. That person's trying. Oh, they're sorry. You should forgive them. Probably going to have to do an episode on this in the future where I talk and dive deeper into like really what we're discussing when it comes to forgiveness. But coming back, we have been taught to settle. And in settling, we don't even pause to consider when we're looking at our spouse who's trying, is the trying he's doing actually truly enough based off of my priorities for my life and my values for my life? Okay, so now that I've made the spectrum clear, right? We've got all these different, you're going to find yourself in your marriage, if you are in the space right now of like, he's trying and it's not enough. The first piece I want you to do is to be able to identify, right? Where are you falling on this spectrum? Now, I have 3 tips that are going to help you to be able to start moving out of this spot of just staying because he's trying. Now, the first one is, I do not want you to make this decision of whether you are staying or not based off of whether it's not as bad as it was before. Okay? And this is like the biggest one that for those of you in that section I just spent a ton of time on, this is where you guys are getting fucked over big time by your brains. Okay? And this is because where it was previously was so awful that now that it is semi better, you think it is good enough. And it is not. So I was drawing an image for the client that I was coaching this week. And we were talking about this exact thing where her brain was like, it's so much better. It's so great. And when we dug into it, I was like, wait, what's actually happening right now? So we broke it down and I started with like my hand really, really low. Okay. So if you can just imagine me on a call with you, my hand's really low to the table. Okay. And I'm like, this is where your relationship started, right? This is where we have got like disrespect, judgment, anger, disappointment. He's very controlling. He's raging at you. You're feeling like a prisoner. There's like torturous manipulation. There's gaslighting. There's a lot of fear, embarrassment. There's like constant apologizing for him, social fear of what others will think because he's like so awful out in public. Okay. So this is where the relationship was starting. And then when things kind of came out, right, things aren't going well. She's told him, I think I want to get divorced. All of a sudden, we start getting couples therapy, right? But then along with that, we've got him being very obsessed with how like she's the problem and doesn't love him the right way. There's a lot of what I would call, y'all, let me just throw this word in, love bombing. That's what that is when he all of a sudden goes from nil to cleaning and cooking and brushing the children's teeth and making the children's lunches in the morning and picking them up from school and now showing up from work 3-4 hours early. Where the fuck was all that time earlier when you were advocating for the relationship, when you were asking him to show up? No. We know this is love bombing because why is it showing up now? Because he's afraid he's going to lose something. So don't get confused that this is really him loving you because the characteristic of love bombing is it is not about you. It is about them getting something they want. They love bomb you to keep you. You are a resource to them. And you'll know it because it feels icky. Real, genuine love, connection, authentically does not feel like this. So in this next instance, I'd raised my hand up a little bit, right? Like, okay, so like maybe he's not terrorizing you and raging at you anymore, and you guys are going to couples therapy, but we're still getting where you have to perform a certain way to keep him happy. And then we moved up even further up the scale, like a little bit further, where I was like, where she was now, y'all. And I have to caveat this by saying like where she had told me, right? Everything's so great. He's been very receptive. He's giving me space. He wants me to grow. He's like more of an open book. He's very approachable now. I can go to him and have serious conversations. He's like more open. He's more gentle, less harsh, less judgmental, more respectful. This was literally what she was saying to me. And yet, because I'm a coach and I can smell brain bullshit from a mile away at this point, when I dug into it with her, this is what was still going on. He was still blaming things on her. Everything was really still about him. We're talking like conversations where late at night she's tired and he wants to go on for about 2 to 3 hours just talking and processing about himself and his feelings. A lot of projecting still where he's like, oh, well, maybe the issues all along were your childhood trauma. There's still a lot of pressure, a lot of pressuring to get back together, pressuring for her to do more, pressuring for her to commit more to the relationship or to be more affectionate. There really was, and this was something I really highlighted for her, still no space for her growth, no honoring of her boundaries, no respecting when she says like, I need some space too. He can't manage himself enough to do that. There was still punishing happening. There was still psychological abuse happening and still the emotional hijacking of what I said earlier of you come to them saying, hey, this really isn't working for me. They end up like not being able to handle it, turning into a mess, and you have to caretake and manage them afterwards. So I made this point with her where I was showing like, yes, in some ways it has gotten better, but it is still really, really not good. And then I drew a line that was so far above that line that we had used as her current spot, right? Because she and I have talked and I know what she wants. And I'll just say it right here, what she fucking deserves, which is a relationship of mutuality, a partner who can independently manage himself, who can regulate his nervous system, or is at least getting the tools to do so, sees her as an equal, wants her to have the things she wants in her life, values her opinions, values her priorities, sees her as someone that deserves to have a full and vibrant life of her own. That is what she's wanting. Not to mention, all the other amazing pieces, right? Like incredible chemistry, great sex, emotional connection. That is so far, I'm doing it right now with my hands, y'all. That is so far above and far away from where she is at now, that for her brain to be saying, it's so much better now. It's like what I wanted. In a lot of ways, it's what I wanted. No, it's actually not. You have to stop and really check in with what are you actually wanting. And this is where we get into the really beautifully high level concept idea of understanding what something feels like rather than just what it looks like. And why this is so high level is because this is like divine feminine shit. This is just because you tell me you love me does not mean I actually feel it. Just because you are now showing up and doing all the things does not mean you are actually being the things that I need most, which is what the divine feminine has learned to sniff out, right? This is that woof part of us that's like, it looks pretty, but it smells nasty. It doesn't smell right. There's something off here. My intuition knows it. So my first tip for y'all is do not choose to stay based off of, well, look, he's trying so much harder than he was, or it's so much better than it was. Because when I really dive into it with most of y'all, the so much better is still really fucking awful. I mean, I have some of you that I've talked to where I'm like, this relationship, even though it's better than what it was, is still so not okay in so many ways. And you know this. A part of you knows this, that if you were to go tell your friends, your girlfriends, or if other people were to know, they would be like, oh my God, that's still really, really bad. So that is my first tip, is do not base your decision off of, is it better than it was? Because if it was really, really bad, somewhat better than really, really bad is still bad. Now, my second tip is stop feeling sorry for him. I'm going to have to really breathe deep while I do this one because you guys know I have just quite a bit of fire towards the masculine at times. So this is something that I have noticed coming from a lot of these women, and you'll know if it's you, but there is this feeling, and I've heard it said this way, of like, well, I blindsided him. Like when I told him I wanted a divorce, he was just so devastated. He had no idea that's where I was at. And he fell off the deep end. And I just, really, he was doing whatever he needed to change. And I was kind of worried. They'll even go so far as being like, I was worried about him mentally, because these men often can't manage themselves and start losing their shit as far as oh my God, please don't leave me. I'll never be the same without you. There's a lot of emotional, it's just that caretaking piece, right? You're the one in this instance that's saying, I am not happy. I want to get divorced. You are the one that's hurting. They spiral into a huge depression, and then you have to caretake them out of it and can't leave because you're too afraid they won't be able to survive. Oh my God, y'all, right? This is shown a lot. Another key characteristic is these men just emphasizing what a hard time they are having and how much you don't seem to care. And I'm like, yeah, dude. Yeah. She doesn't care. And that's normal, because when you have been abused for years and years and years, somebody just all of a sudden changing is not going to automatically fix years of abuse. That's what would actually be weird and crazy, is if these men started changing and you all of a sudden were like, I'm so happy. This is so great. It feels wonderful. Most of you listening to this episode or to this podcast don't happen to be Stepford wives. So it doesn't work that way. Trauma has real consequences. And most of these men are not manning up enough to accept the results and the consequences of their behavior. So I really want you guys to get through your heads. Feeling sorry for him is not going to help the situation. Okay? I don't want you pitying him. I don't want you feeling sorry for him. I want you grounding into yourself as a woman and communicating to his highest self, which would be conversations where you're like, I understand you're not happy about this and you need to go fix that because I am dealing with my trauma. This is not the time for me to be caretaking you because of all the abuse that you did to me that now you feel so bad about and you need someone to make you feel okay about. Do you see the fuck upness of that cycle that we get into, right? This is where you end up forcing yourself because you feel sorry for him to have sex with him. Oh, I had an affair and he feels so inadequate now, so I need to keep having sex with him to make him feel good about himself. Many of you will talk about in this moment really struggling with feeling, and I know because by the time you get to me, you're starting to feel like you're going a little bit insane. So you'll notice that when you told him, so let me just kind of frame this out for you guys because this is important for you to understand. You've gone through so much shit in the relationship until the point where you finally say you want a divorce or you finally, had an affair or whatever. And in that moment of saying, I want the divorce, what I hear from so many of you is you feel relief. Oh my God, thank goodness we can be done. And then you get sideswiped by this, oh, he's now doing a 180, he's changing. And so you go back into the crazy room with him. And what I start to see is you will see a downward slide of your mental health. Because to start prioritizing him and his growth and really, once again, being there for him while he goes through this journey to try and save the marriage is so re-traumatizing for you. Because now, not only have you, in saying I am drowning, I need to get out, which is what you were saying when you were saying, I want the divorce, you are now having to go back in and caretake this person while he goes through all of his healing, which I'm putting healing in air quotes because as I've hopefully shown you guys, I don't truly believe that this is, I will offer that it's some kind of healing. I don't consider this to be the true, deepest level of healing because there's still so much projection, traumatizing of you, so much manipulation, so much of not being able to hold space. It's just man, it's just such a shitstorm because it's once again, two people, neither one has a secure attachment and both are drowning. And you're staying there while he's drowning, trying to save him. And as I've said on the podcast before, when someone is drowning and you go try to save them, they will end up drowning you. And that is what I'm pointing out is I see how when you go back in and you're just staying because he's trying, your mental health starts to tank because you are now having to manage his feelings and emotions because he can't be an adult or he's not getting enough of the resources and the true hardcore help to step up and work through it on his own. And here's where I want to place the blame for that because, what I notice is these men being upset, well, why aren't you leaning in with me? Why aren't you helping me? We should be working on this together. This is a marriage. Don't you want this to last, right? And you have all this guilt that you now don't want to work on the marriage. You know what? Fuck that. If they want to be mad at someone, they get to be mad at the patriarchy and toxic masculinity. And I'll even throw in there Trump. For all those men that voted for him, he is the epitome of toxic masculinity. That's what they get to be mad at. They get to be mad at all of those men that lied to them and told them this was a way of life that would actually work, that they could get away with treating a woman like shit and that she wouldn't end up leaving. And this goes to something that I am like, wow, so big about right now. I have an incredible podcast episode that I'm linking in the show notes that I highly recommend for those of you that are just, feeling the same kind of fire I am around this. It's by the podcast Diabolical Lies. And one of my clients sent it to me. I listened to it and I was just dying. I was like, this is one of the most well-explained breakdowns of this whole idea we've had lately that oh, men are suffering. It's so hard on men. And I even had kind of been buying into this. And I do, let me caveat by saying yes, men are suffering right now in certain ways, but it is not for the reasons we think it is. And in this, and by suffering, I mean, the consequences are landing. The consequences of not stepping up and doing your own work and individuating and becoming the human you need to be, a human that can respect and honor and allow women to be in mutual relationships with them, and that women will no longer put up with that. In this podcast episode, I love it. They say something like the cat's out of the bag. Women have freedoms now. And even if those freedoms go back over the next 4 years, I believe, as they do in the podcast, that is not going to be what do they call that? Whatever, it's the cat's out of the bag or the thing that comes out of the box. You can't put it back in the box. The divine feminine's out now and we are not going back. But I want to read a quote from the podcast that really puts in the most incredible terms what I'm saying when I say who they need to be mad at? They need to be mad at the men. They need to be mad at the patriarchy. So this is what she says. She says, patriarchy is set up by men to concentrate the power in the hands of a few men. So, for instance, at a societal level, you're going to have the power concentrated at the top in institutions like the government, the church, corporations. These institutions are overwhelmingly, almost exclusively helmed by rich white men, and the rest of us are their dominion. But when it comes to the familial level, okay, there is this part that's being threatened. This is the part that is actively being challenged at the familial level, which is that the consolation prize for the rest of the men who do not have the real power in society is submission from your wife. Let that land. The patriarchy sells men on this idea of having power, but and they break it down in the episode so beautifully that actually very few men actually get the power the patriarchy is promising. And the consolation prize was that men would get to have dominion in their families. And she goes on to say, women's purpose in the system is to absorb the male pain. But it's like you said, we're at this extremely critical point because women's purpose in the system is to absorb the male pain, right? And so now that is starting to be challenged, it's like Jordan Peterson's idea of uprising all the men who have no real power, whose only power was their power over their family. Now that is being challenged, it's like, oh shit, 5-alarm fire. We have to change this. We have to fix this immediately. Otherwise, the whole thing is going to fall apart. And that is what we are seeing. Y'all, this is what we are seeing is the patriarchy sold men this bullshit idea that being this way would get them what they wanted. It didn't. The only consolation prize was that they would have a wife that wouldn't leave them. And that doesn't work anymore. Women are no longer willing to stay and be the, catch-all of men's shit, the dump that they place all of their unprocessed pain, which is what so many of you have been feeling in your marriages, right? And so I'm emphasizing that continuing to feel sorry does not help the problem, which is that men have to start stepping up and understanding the bigger context of what we're dealing with here and taking responsibility for the consequences of their choices. And this really comes back to, for me, I really realized like, and this goes back to, what I was talking about with that forgiveness piece of, as I was processing through all of that trauma, and I still am, right? I'm going to be the rest of my life. But the moment with my dad and everything that happened, there was this moment where I realized, and I finally like got it. He was the adult. I do not need to feel like I have to forgive someone who was the adult, who had the resources, who could have gone and gotten help and chose not to. And this was also the moment when I finally honored all of the fucking hard work I'd been doing and grounded into like, I have also chosen to do that work. I am also an adult and I have actually chosen to go do that work. I am no longer going to put myself in places with people who are adults and choosing not to do the work. I am no longer going to let my life be impacted by continuing to feel sorry for people who are now adults and can go get help. And this comes back to the feeling that I have of like, deep down, everyone always has a choice. It doesn't mean it's not hella fucking hard. People will say, oh, but he's been through so much trauma. He's been through this. Yeah, I get it. In fact, I know it. I'm dating a man who knows it. We have both had horrific trauma in our paths, him especially. And he has done the work over his life to figure that piece out. He finally, and it was bumpy, right? And that's the other thing that I want to like put in context for y'all, is I see so clearly how, my current partner, he's been married and divorced twice. So he like had to learn through those past relationships more about who he was, what he valued, what his priorities were. He wasn't always the man he is today, but through that journey, he became it. And so I see these instances of like when someone is not really doing their deeper work, and we're talking about, your spouse, it is not a kindness to continue feeling sorry for them and staying just because they're trying. Because I truly believe in the gift of like that ending, them going on and doing their own work, and hopefully in the future becoming more of the person that they are meant to be and finding someone who is a fit for that, and you having the right to go on and find someone who is also a match for your growth and the work you are doing. I mean, hell, y'all, that is my journey. That is my path. That is what I have shown through the last 5 years of dating and consistently not staying with someone that I felt like I was having to settle with. Not staying with someone just because they're trying, okay? And by, we have to define trying in different ways, but I think I showed you very clearly on that spectrum what it really means to be trying. And here's the thing too, I don't think we can even base it off of trying. It's going to come down to this next piece I'm going to take you into, which is you can't really pick off of whether somebody is trying or not. It has to come off of choosing your values and priorities first and then gauging what they are doing off of those. So like I said earlier in the episode, my top 5 priorities in my life previously were not things I picked for myself. I even think about the values I'd been given. The values were motherhood and nurturing and service and giving at all times and always being happy and nice and kind. That's what was valued in women. God, those are just so not my values now. And I can feel so clearly how much those were just put upon me. So you have to take the time now to excavate and examine what your priorities are and what your values are and who they came from and whether they are actually yours. And I hope that this episode, more than anything, will impress upon you that this is your, call it God, call it source, I don't know, but it is your like source given right to be able to choose your priorities for your life. And, it breaks my heart that there are women who live in the world in areas where like the governments that they live in do not protect that right, because I absolutely believe it is a human right to know your priorities and then to go live a life in line with those. And so many women out there, right? We grow up having our priorities stolen from us before we even realize that they are a thing, that they are intrinsically ours. We have our value system hijacked before we ever even get to create it for ourselves. So, this is your opportunity now. Let this episode be that call to you of like, there's never a better time than the present to reclaim what is rightfully yours. So as I said earlier, my top 5 previously were like God and the church, my marriage, my kids, my family. Let me just tell you what my top 5 are now. Okay, I had the opportunity to dive into these in my workshop in the community and to talk about them. And I was just it was like really lovely for me too, to like reground and state aloud for myself what mine are and to feel so beautifully unashamed and proud of them because they are very different than previously. So now my top 5 priorities for my life. First one, top of the list, is personal growth. Like I come first. That's how I choose to live my life. And that means, my healing, my self-connection, those are number 1 priority for me. Second for me is my work and my soul purpose. And that feels I just fucking love how, I guess the word's like rebellious that feels, because in Mormonism, they taught me it needed to be God and my family. And I'm like, no, it's me and my work. Take that, bitches. And I love my work, and when I say work, it's my soul purpose. This is a huge aspect of me. You guys know that, you feel that through this podcast. That is a huge priority for my life, is letting my soul purpose be shared with the world. Third is my romantic relationship. And not because anybody has told me like, you need to prioritize relationships, but just because I fucking love prioritizing my romantic relationship. I love having a relationship that I am obsessed with, that I love pouring into, a partner that I love spending time with and just making a priority. That is one of like the funnest areas of my life. And I've chosen it not because of any statistics or because it's, you need to get married, you need to have a partner. Like, no, I love it. And I choose it because it's what I want. Fourth would be my community and friends. That is so important to me. I've seen how much that fills my cup. And fifth is my kids. And I just love too that my kids are fifth on that list, because that has shown me, for me personally, when I prioritize all those other things before my kids, my relationship with my kids is better. That's just how it works for me. And I also just have to say, I love that religion doesn't even make this list. It just doesn't. I would offer that under my personal growth, that like healing and soul connection is like my connection to the divine, but religion, no, just not a fit for me anymore. Now, along with knowing your priorities, I love, and this wasn't something we got to do in the workshop, but I've realized now it's an important key piece, is understanding your values as well. And values are, I'll list off mine so you kind of get an idea for it. But values are self-trust. So that is like my number 1 value, is self-trust. Next comes self-expression. Next is growth. Then soul connections, pleasure, and affection. Those are just some of my like very, very top values. I might also add that sharing my gifts is a value of mine, but like notice, right? I don't necessarily value selflessness. I'm thinking of like values I was taught as young. I don't necessarily value being nice necessarily. Like I definitely would put speaking truth, being authentic over niceness big time. where I was taught to really value hard work, I value pleasure over hard work now. I do work that is pleasurable to me. That is such a divine feminine move for me, right? To be like, no, my work is my pleasure. My pleasure is my work. So here's the key. Once you know what you value and once you know what your priorities are, it gets so much easier to see where you are misaligned in your life, right? So let me give you some examples. Like, if you value self-trust and you have a partner who's always questioning you and thinking they know better than you and constantly, getting into these conversations where they're the one who has the answers rather than supporting your inner knowings, that's not a fit, ladies. That is not a fit with your values. I don't care how much he does all this other shit. If that is one of your top values and he is directly impacting that, that's how this is not aligned. It's not about how much he's trying in all those other areas if he cannot meet you in something that is like your very, very top value. Self-expression's one of my top values. I've had partners who I can think back to, like, I've had partners who commented on, like, can you laugh not so loud? I don't like the way your hair looks. I don't like the way your clothes are. You're wearing too much jewelry. Yep, nope, not aligned. Not aligned. I am not interested anymore in any partner that thinks he knows what's going to look best on me, who thinks he knows better than I do about what I'm going to wear or how I'm going to dress or my hair, right? I definitely was told a couple times when I cut my hair that my partner liked it better longer. Like, oh my God. If you value growth and you are working hard in your life, and I know so many of you have, right? I talk to women all the time who've been in therapy, who are reading the books, who are listening to the podcasts, who are doing the deeper work. And you have a partner who's plenty content to stay where he is, who's like, nah, I'm good. I don't want to look at that shit. I'm okay with just being where I'm at. That is not a fit. That is misaligned. If you value sharing your gifts and being a leader in the world and you want bigger things for yourself and you have a partner who is constantly pouting and needing your attention and bitching about how much you don't care about him, that is not a fit. If you've got a priority to put something big in the world, to have a soul purpose, and you've got a partner who not only cannot support you in that, but in fact is like bitching all the time about how little you do and take care of him, y'all, are we seeing it? Is it becoming clearer? I hope it is, because this is the key to getting out of the mind fuck of he's trying, why don't I want to stay? This is why you don't want to stay. Okay? Because deep down, what those women are missing on those calls with me when they're like, well, but it's so much better, it's so much this. What they are missing is, even though he's doing those things, he's still not actually aligned with their deepest values. Because you know what most of these women are wanting? You know what most of you come to me and what you're talking about in your afters that you want in the future, what you're hoping for most? You talk about deep soul connections. You talk about a partner who sees you for who you are, who not only sees you, but like fucking adores and loves you. I had a woman this week talk about what she wanted when we were talking about what she wants instead. She's like, I want someone who loves my quirks. And I teared up on that call, because in that moment I was like, oh my God, this is what we're talking about. Like, we are talking about a partner who adores you, who sees the brilliance of what you are, who wants you to achieve your dreams, who is striving alongside you to become the best version of himself. And hell yes, that loves your kinks. I love that my partner Joe is obsessed with the little goofy things I do. You know, he would never dream of telling me, hey, can you tone down your laugh? It's a little bit too loud. Like, oh my God, no. The way he looks at me when I'm, and that I feel safe enough, right? To be the entirely goofy, silly, over the top, often too much for everybody else, me, and never too much for him. That is an incredible gift to be partnered. And why? Let me just clarify that too. That's not just a gift. That is what I fucking deserve, because that is what I give, y'all. I give that to partners. I show up for partners. I love deeply. I love authentically. I love genuinely. When you are my partner, you will have someone in your corner that will go to the mattresses for you, that will love you like nobody else will. And in seeing that and honoring that in myself, right? That's the whole like being like, I get to have my own priorities. I get to have my values. I am a fucking amazing human and I deserve that back. That is what has allowed me to not settle, to go, yeah, there's lots of guys that would love to be with me. I dated one a couple years ago that was definitely trying. And you know what, y'all? It still wasn't enough, because I know where I'm headed. I know the priorities for my life, what I want most. And I've gotten to a point where I'm not going to let a partner who's not showing up and going just as hard as I am in life keep me from having what I deserve most, which is a life that is deeply soul-led and that has the soul connections that I want most, which is what I've heard from y'all. You want partners who emotionally connect with you, partners who, are empathic and can intuit how you're feeling and what you need. I mean, God, this morning I woke up, I was definitely feeling off, but I couldn't even articulate it to myself. And right before leaving, Joe just, it's so sweet. He always hugs or kisses me before he leaves, but he pulled me into this hug and he just held me to him. And as I started to kind of breathe a little bit deeper, he was like, hey, are you feeling, how you doing this morning? Feels like you might be going through something. And I was like, oh my God, yes, I am. And I said, thank you for saying aloud what I couldn't even I just was a little bit frantic and dysregulated. I realized now I'd woken up in an emotional flashback. I'd had some pretty intense dreams. That's a very common thing with CPTSD. And he sensed it without me even saying it. And instead of, as partners I've had in the past, if I'm not always, together and able to hold space for them, they get all freaked out and want to fix it. He just pulled me in and acknowledged it. That was all I needed. That is what I deserve. That is what so many of you deserve. And you will be able to have that. This is what I say to all my women when I'm like, tell me what you want instead. And I know it's possible. The only thing that prevents you from having that is settling, is continuing to over prioritize someone else's wants for their life over your own, which I just have to point out is what so many of you are doing in this instance. That's what's inherent to this whole phrase of well, he's trying, so shouldn't I want to stay? Do you hear how you are not the central focus of that world? It is, what does he want? And what's his priority? He wants to stay married. Of course. I get it. Who wouldn't? So many of you are fucking awesome. So many of you are incredible gifts to the world that have often been mistreated and not taken care of like you should have. So of course he doesn't want the consequences. Of course he doesn't want to have to face the music. But that does nobody a service. And why it doesn't, and this is where I hope so many of you will also be very brutally honest with yourself, is because you staying when you don't really want to stay, as we said earlier, your mental health starts to decline. You start to spiral in ways that are not good for you. When you try to keep putting yourself back in the box, when you try to keep putting yourself back in the bag, that has a real impact on some of the things you value the most, right? Your connection with your inner self, with your inner child, your self-trust. Those things all get impacted when you keep trying to push down your values and your priorities to make yourself fit into what he needs. Trust your journey and trust that he's on his journey too. I take such a big macro perspective to these instances now, to these, to marriages, to what's really happening here, where, for me, I don't see the ending of a marriage as the most awful, horrible thing ever. In fact, I often see it as a crucial piece for many people in their growth, right? For me personally, the divorce was the best thing for me because I now had space to grow at the rate I wanted to grow. And holy shit, did I in the 5 years, post divorce. And I will offer, not that this is what happens for everybody, but I really believe my ex-husband also, because of that divorce, not in spite of it, because of it, he went deeper and did a lot more of his own growth. And that, that in my book is like one of the best scenarios you can get, which is that those two people step up and they go on and they get to live lives that lead them into more fulfilling places. Obviously, we don't make that decision at all. What would I say? With the certainty that will happen for our partner, because that's not our responsibility. That's in his lane. That's what he gets to choose. But staying and sacrificing yourself because he's trying is not the gift that we all think it is, and that I thought it was, and that many of you that are in this situation think it is. And I'm also thinking, I just want to add in, I've spoken a lot about this particular relationship, right? This one where there's like the severe abuse and then the 180 degree. But I also want to offer that this, coming back to your values and your priorities absolutely works no matter where you are at on that spectrum of the relationship. Okay? Because in the instance I gave previously of those clients, right, that had husbands more kind of on the more positive realm, I was thinking about them, and actually for both of them, one of their most important priorities is getting to have authentic, soul-connected, like hot, filled with chemistry, exciting sex in their primary partnerships. And can I just get a hell yeah to this being a priority for so many of us? In fact, I should have put in my just so you know, encapsulated in my romantic relationship is like massive sex exploration and kink. And I love that part of life. It is one of my favorite pieces. So when women tell me like that's one of their priorities, I'm like, abso-fucking-lutely it is. And especially if this is the only person you're going to be having sex with because you're in a monogamous relationship. So for both of those women, that is one of their priorities. And in their current relationships, even though they have partners that, we could probably both agree are like relatively good guys, that is missing. And so especially for them, it can get tricky because they're like, well, not only is it's not even like he's trying, he's just like a good guy. Shouldn't I be okay with this? No, you shouldn't. Because if one of your highest priorities for your life is to have that in your primary partnership, then this isn't a fit. And I want to all of you that may think, oh my God, it's not possible though. Like, how can you have in a committed monogamous relationship, like amazing, great connected sex? It is absolutely possible. Like just last night with Joe, I was talking with him and I was like, wow, the intimacy and the sex is just getting better for us. And I will offer why that is because Joe and I happen to have a lot of our priorities and our values very aligned. We both highly value and prioritize sex and chemistry and intimacy that is mind-blowing and that takes time. And that is like, all last night was just like us hanging out, fooling around. And I was like, I want this the rest of my life. And I kind of said that to him and he was like, yeah, same. Like, we often get married to people at a point when our values and our priorities are very different than what they are now. And I want to acknowledge that, right? It doesn't have to be the extreme of like, wow, I was being abused, now I'm not, right? It can be as simple as, for some of these clients, thinking about him specifically, when they got married, she was okay. She was actually at a point in her life where she didn't want deep soul connected sex. That felt way too intimate, like fucking no. And having a spouse who was like, look, I'm never going to love that deeply again. Like, I've been hurt. I don't want to do that. That was a good fit for her. Now, 15, 20 years down the road, it's not a fit anymore. She's grown, she's changed. And what she wants now is exploration in that area, is expansion in that area. And she deserves, as all of you do, to have a partner that aligns with that. This is your life, y'all. And I just hope that this episode has illustrated for you how our lives as women have been hijacked by the patriarchy into making us think that staying with our husband or staying in a marriage just because he's trying is the right thing to do. No, it has to be so much deeper than that. We stay not because someone's trying, not because someone's changing. Go much, much deeper into what are your actual values and priorities for your life and what you want. And that is where we choose whether to stay or go from. All right, y'all. This episode was an absolute blast to record. As you guys know from last week, the community is now accepting applications. I am so excited to get to review these, to get to welcome more of you into this space. I also just wanted to ask and recommend, if you guys have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please do. Every time you subscribe, every time you leave a written review, that helps this podcast find more women like you, right? Apple analyzes those and then it moves this podcast up to where when women search, it's one of the first ones that they see. And I want to be in that space. As you all know, I think the things we are talking about, the ways we are changing the world are super important. And I want even more women to hear about it. And you can help me by subscribing and also leaving a review. So if you haven't done one yet, please go do. I read all of them. They light me up. I'm so excited to hear them. And hopefully I will get to see some of you soon in the community. Till next week, my babes.